So I'm Jillian Perkins. I'm the medical director of the large animal hospital here. And, you know, we're very happy to have this seminar series for you, the horse enthusiasts of the area. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. I know it's cold out there, and it's, once you get home in the evening, it's hard to get out again. So thanks for coming to hang out with us. I wanted to put a plug in for our future seminars. So in January, Dr. Morrison is going to be talking about pregnant mares and their foals, so how to get prepared for that. So maybe some of you have some expecting foals next spring, so that should be exciting. And we're also planning a tour of the hospital in February, which we're trying to figure out how to get the word out and also have people sign up for that, because it's going to be kind of a multiple stations where you get to kind of see a lot of stuff that we're doing in the hospital. So we kind of need to have people numbers and all that sort of stuff confirmed for that event. So we'll try to figure out. So if you haven't signed in already, please sign in at the entrance there. Leave your email address. We can forward any information about that in the future to you. So that's
we'll have a way for you to sign up and RSVP for the hospital tour by the January.
Yes.
Seminar.
Excellent. Yeah. Sarah's in charge of that. All right. Have I missed anything, Lindsay? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's it.
That was great. And this is Steve.
And okay, so we'll move on to introducing Steve, our excellent farrier. Basically, I've been working with Steve for a few years now in the hospital.
Yeah.
And he is brought a lot of excellent shoeing to our facility and caring of our horses' feet. He is a journeyman ferryman and also is in the Farrier Hall of Fame, which is in Kentucky.
Kentucky, yes, at Churchill Downs.
Churchill Downs, right. So we're very fortunate to have such an excellent resource here. We look forward to hearing some good pointers, because we did actually have some questions last month about how to handle some foot problems. So we hope to have some time to also address questions and concerns that you may have. So thank you, Steve, for being available for us tonight. And we'll let you have at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. I see some familiar faces out there. Having shot horses around here for 50 years, made a lot of friends and, well, maybe a few enemies here and there. So any of my enemies are here. Take the tomatoes out of the cans before you throw them. Believe it or not, I actually sat in this classroom when I was undergrad here at Cornell, and actually it's really weird to be giving lectures out in front of it, but it's just amazing how things happen. So we're going to talk about the horse's feet, and this is an introductory lecture about, you know, I want you to understand more about what's going on with your horse's feet, and it'll show you some things you probably never thought you'd ever see, and we'll just get right to this. So the horse's foot is a pretty unique piece of equipment, and it's very well designed when things are going right. But it does have things that can go wrong with it. And not all feet are the same. A lot of people think that they're just size difference, but no, feet are different, very different from one another. There's different shapes. Feet are very relative to the type of breed that the horse is. I can look at a horse's foot and pretty much tell you what his breed is. And fronts are different from hinds. So you can see this nice, beautifully shaped round front, healthy frog, nice thick hoof wall, versus this is a good hind, same thing, but it's shaped like a spade, like you would dig a hole with, and this is nice and round. So this geometry here is made for supporting, and this geometry here is made for digging into the ground and propelling forward. So the horse is a rear-wheel drive animal, so they use the hinds to propel forward and the fronts to steer and support. And it reflects in the shape because the front end of the horse carries more weight than the hind end. So you have to have difference in shape and different ways things are used. And they definitely differ by breed. Quarter horse like this here has a very different foot than this warm blood here. And just like dogs have different characteristics, so do horses and with their feet and other animals. And so the various breeds are developed for specific uses and works, and the foot goes along right with that. And so if we want to take a look at the foot itself, we see on this nice cross section, we see this nice thick hoof wall that bears a large portion of the weight, and that's insensitive. And this area below is part of this is the frog and insensitive sole. This area here is real important to us. This is called the digital cushion. And this is, a lot of people think that, I've heard it say that a horse has 4 hearts, one in his chest and then one in each leg, which pumps the blood up and down the leg. Well, that's actually not true. This works, the heart has muscle around it and squeezes the blood in and out. Whereas this works the reverse way. This is more like a sponge. And so when the horse is lifting his foot off the ground, this sponge fills up with blood, and then when the horse lands and bears weight in the stance phase, this blood is squeezed out, and that's what pushes up the leg. So it's just the opposite of the way some people describe it. And there's other anatomical structures here, and we can see a couple different cross sections here that are very important. So when I see a digital cushion that's not as thick and vibrant as this, I know there's problems. Because we don't have as much blood flow to the foot, we have poor nutrition to the cells that produce hoof, we have poor shock absorption, and we see a lot of things associated with a poor digital cushion, and sometimes that's just genetics. Other times it's the hoof care. We also see this cross section of the navicular bone here. This is the coffin bone, and this is the short pasture bone. So, and right back in here, we see the flexor tendon coming down, and we see the extensor tendon. We'll see more of that in a second. Here is another thing another good horse cross section of the foot. First phalanx, second phalanx, or third phalanx. So we call this, P3, P2, P1, navicular bone. Again, a nice digital cushion. And these lines are important to me where they are. So this would be the center of articulation where this bone articulates with the coffin bone. Here is where the extensor process is, and this extensor tendon inserts here, and here is where that the flexor tendon, and there's going to be more on this in a little bit. But these are all important structures and landmarks, and you can see how this navicular bone, it works as a fulcrum, and how this tendon can compress all this. So if this fulcrum is not working correctly, then we do have problems and soreness and so on. The horse starts landing toe-heel rather than heel-toe, and that's also an indication to me that something is not right. And if we look at the circulatory system of the hoof, it's quite complex, and this is an average type foot, and there is literally hundreds and hundreds of different blood vessels. You have the circumflex artery that goes around the outside of the foot, and the digital arteries, and all this system has to be working right for the hoof to function right and have the proper nutrition. And if we go down to the microscopic layers, you see these little interdigitating fingers. These are all fed by tiny little blood vessels, and these are called laminae. And you see how you have a finger like that and a finger like that, and off these are tiny little fingers. And this is what is the mechanism to where the hoof wall is actually joined to the skeleton at the coffin bone of the horse. So the horse is actually suspended on the inside of the foot with some help from the sole and the frog, but he is hanging right on that inside of that hoof capsule. And when this breaks down for various reasons, then we have big trouble. And if we really go down to what we call the basement membrane, this is at a highly magnified layer. You see all the way these little blood vessels and these little papillae are being nourished. And when this blood, something goes wrong with this blood supply, parts of the hoof die and have problems. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, as I say on here, what does this have to do with the horse's foot? It's pretty famous, the St. Louis arch. What it means is that this is a very, very strong natural structure. And so if I take a saw and cut off the front of the horse's foot, now this horse's cadaver here, don't worry, no animals were harmed to produce this. But you can see almost the same thing in this structure, because this structure has to bear a lot of weight and a lot of force. And one of the terms I use with the students when we're teaching this stuff is geometry. Good geometry creates power, movement, and soundness, and we protect that geometry with the way we trim and the way we shoot. So horseshoeing is really applied physics and geometry. We have shapes that we have to maintain to deal with the forces that are coming down on these shapes. And we have a good arch like that, that's nice and strong. That's the cross-section of the front of the coffin bone. And if we look down inside the foot, there's the navicular bone itself. You see it's way forward. A lot of people think it's all the way back here, but no, this is quite far forward. These are the lateral cartilages that kind of hold everything together, like shock absorption. And this is the top end of the coffin bone, where the next, so the short pastern bone interdigitates right here. So you can see this fulcrum situation is very important, and these structures have to be maintained properly for things to work right. And the reason why I'm showing all this, because if I just talk about this stuff without showing you and talk about mechanics, it's all very vague. But when you see the blood supply, the bones, and things like that, then all of a sudden it starts to make a little more sense why we have to treat this stuff really well. And then there's all these tendons and ligaments that come down and join and provide the motion and also the shock absorption. So without this type of arrangement with all these different attachments in various places, we wouldn't have not only the motion that we need, but the shock absorption and the maintenance, proper maintenance of the way this leg. So all of a sudden, this architecture becomes very important to us, and how we, by shortening a toe or raising a heel or lowering, it's a closed system. So if we put a lot more tension on this tendon, we are taking a lot of tension off that one, and vice versa. So we have to balance all these forces. We can't do anything extremely for these reasons, because it's a closed system. The energy has to be maintained in a balanced state. And this is all important to us to do this. So what influences the foot, or the actual foot itself? One of the number one things I see in traveling around the country, which I get a chance to do, is moisture conditions. And we live in an area where moisture conditions vary. And it varies from season to season and year to year. We've had a very wet fall, so feet are very soft and tend to fall apart. Whereas if I was just out in Arizona a month and a half ago, it's dry, dry, dry until they got the flooding rains. But before that, it was dry. The feet are hard as rocks. So moisture, lack of moisture, or the back and forth, all has influences on the horse's foot. Certainly nutrition influences a horse's foot, because the hoof itself is made up of all these different materials that have to be delivered into the foot, and amino acids and vitamins and minerals provide this. The ground surface has a big influence. Again, horses, and that has to do with moisture sometimes, whether the horse is on hard ground or soft ground, whether the horse is shown in synthetic footings, or it lives in a swamp. So it's definitely ground surface, hard, soft, changing, it's all different. And then a conformation certainly influences different shapes and how these forces are produced on these feet. So horses that are well put together and well balanced are less likely to have foot problems than horses that are not that are not well put together. And then shoeing has an influence, because whatever we do as farriers, we influence the foot. what we trim, how we shoe. If it's done right, it's a good thing. If it's not done right, it doesn't work so well for the horse. Or the lack of it completely, some horses are not taken care of. So the horses that need care, they're not getting it, has an influence. The general health of the horse's foot. So we can see what a fever does, because we see fever rings, just like you might have some on your fingernails if you've had a high fever. And so it's about a year's worth of growth to grow out a foot. And so we can see differences in the horse's health when they've had problems. So the general health of the horse reflects on the foot. And certainly disease processes will be seen on the foot. And as I said earlier, the breed of the horse has an influence on the foot. So believe it or not, this is the same foot before and after shoeing. And this was obviously left on way too long, not done properly. This is an Amish road horse, the wrong selection of the shoe, foot not trimmed right, and this was a real job to get from there to there, but this is the same foot. So this is the difference between neglect and shoeing and making the horse, helping the horse. And the guy who owned this horse called me up and said, I can't believe how nice my horse is moving down the road now. So the horse is the judge. Here's a diseased foot. This is a chronic laminitic horse. And you can see this does not look like the feet I showed you earlier. We did some toe resection. We have a lot of displacement of the coffin bone here. But this horse is, again, surviving and getting along with these feet, but needs help. And so when we talk about, you know, a laminitis, here's a good graphic of this normal foot that we've shown you earlier with the proper alignment of the bones. And here is a horse that's rotated. See how these tissues have broken down some. These little fingers that I showed you earlier have lost their blood supply and deteriorated. And because we have a pull of the deep flexor tendon, that pulls that away from that attachment. It's almost like when you get your, if you slam your finger with a hammer or slam it into the door, you can lose the fingernail. But you don't have to walk on it. And here's a close-up of a severely founded horse. We have all the scar tissue now that once was attachment. You can see how this bone has just been pulled down by this. And so there are ways we can mitigate this or help these horses, but sometimes we don't get to see them until after the fact. Excuse me. So conformation is also an influence. So this foot here is not a nice symmetrical foot like I showed you earlier. It's off of this leg. And you can see how my lines will show you that the conformation is producing this shape. And it's a distorted foot. You have two different lengths of heel. You have what's called a shear heel. This wall is run off a little bit. This is flared here. And this misaligned cannon bone to the radius is producing this shape. So if I look at a horse's foot on the bottom, I can pretty much tell you how he's built above. We're going to talk about conformation. This is a whole hour lecture I do, so this is just going to be very brief. If you want more confirmation, we could do that lecture next year, and we keep doing this lecture series. But we have to think of it in three dimensions in order to understand confirmation. And the best way to do that is the X, Y, and Z axis. And this produces whether we have good symmetrical feet or whether we have uneven wear patterns and we have distorted feet. And a good book, a friend of mine, Dr. Doug Butler, did his PhD here, put a book out called Shoeing in Your Right Mind and talks about these three different axes, and I'm going to go through them really quick here, but how each axis affects how the horse does. The Z-axis is your side view, and this is your animation. Your X-axis is how your foot falls, and your Y-axis is your rotation. So when it comes down to it, your X-axis, when we're looking at the horse from the front or the rear, is your plumb line. Is he face wide or face narrow? Right here, here, or straight. Your Y-axis is rotational. So this is like if the horse is standing on a glass table, and we're looking right up the leg, or we're looking straight down, and this is your rotation and your alignment of your bones and joints. So a lot of times X and Y blends together. So a horse typically can be toed out and base wide. You see a lot of that. less likely is a horse that's faced narrow and toed in. We see some of that, and they move like a mixed master. They're just stepping all over themselves. And more commonly is a horse that's faced narrow, could be straight or toed in. And very, very hard for a horse to be face wide and toed in. That's usually a very lame horse, very misaligned. So these are the common things that we see. And then the Z-axis is your side view, front or hind, and that position under the body, whether the horse stands under or stands behind himself, whether he stands out forward, whether he's very steep or very flat. So that's the Z-axis. So all these things combine, and sometimes too many of them are combining, and when you try and adjust one, you throw the other one where you don't want it. So the more deviations the horse has, the harder it is to balance the horse. So it's very important to understand conformation. And I say that's a whole other lecture, but this is the way I like to teach it because it defines each axis really well. And each axis, when it's not correct, has its own set of problems that we can easily define after that. And so when we have a base-wide conformation, so the hoof distorts laterally, we have that asymmetric shape. They land on the outside toe and bruise the inside heel. So that's just one example of what a base-wide looks like. And so when we see horseshoe wear and distortion, this is worn right off. There's another Amish road horse here. Just wore that right away. And so excessive wear either means inaccurate trimming, poor conformation, or lameness, or sometimes all three. And hoofs on crooked legs do not wear themselves to balance, which is a misnomer you see in a lot of books. No different than when your tire gets, your front end gets knocked out of line in our famous Ithaca potholes. Okay, my tire is wearing funny, my front end is shimmying. I put a new tire on, guess what? That tire gets room too. We can realign the car, but we can't realign the horse, but we can adjust the hoof capsule to some degree. So hoofs on crooked-legged horses wear actually the wrong opposite way. And so it's pretty easy for me to look at a horse that's wearing his feet wrong and know what needs to be trimmed and where he needs a little extra shoe put on. But lame horses, given the opportunity, will wear to their comfort. So I always go back to the horse. Does the horse like what I do? The horse is the real judge. No matter what I say, if the horse doesn't like it, then I have to rethink what I'm doing. And so here's a very distorted hoof. You can see having a pretty good flare on the inside. The whole outside is worn off. And this horse is, again, not built properly and has problems that way. And so when you get these distorted feet like this, you can see how you get this uneven force distribution. The bottom of the coffin bone is not landing flat. You get a flare here. You get forces coming up here, and all these joints are misaligned this way. And so if this horse is in hard work, this horse is not going to last very long. So horses have to apply the laws of physics because we have gravity here. And so we have, especially working horses, horses at speed, horses that are highly collected, gravity, momentum, and inertia, hard stops and quick starts, versus their muscles, bones, ligaments, and tendons. And it's all designed pretty well if things are lined up well. And we try and breed purebred horses to withstand abnormal forces, but sometimes when we're breeding for purebred breeding and we're looking for color, we bring in things that we really don't want conformationally. So we see a lot of poorly put together horses in the color breeds especially. Or if we're breeding for speed, a horse can run fast and not be put together that well. Maybe does a lot of good work racing, but doesn't last, breaks down. So these are the things we have to consider, is force equals mass times acceleration. And the horses are doing a lot of acceleration. And so proper conformation is necessary to handle abnormal forces. And nutrition and conditioning is certainly important. And I've always said the taller and heavier a horse is, the more correct it has to be built. If you build a little shed and you're not plumb, and it even snows a bit, you're going to be up okay. But if you build a 3-story shed and you're not plumb and it snows a lot, it's going to start to sag, and the horse is no different. and certainly as horses are asked to be in harder work and advanced competitions, they are worked harder. And everybody always says, oh, I knew this crooked-legged horse that could do this. Well, that's great, but not all horses. So here's a good example. Here's a Cornell polo player. He's galloping around a turn. We've got all these forces going this way. We've got the center of mass going down here, and this is all nice and lined up, and he can do this over and over and over and not get hurt. When we trim the average hoof, we want to, again, look at the structures. What I try to teach is we want a nice, long, healthy frog. We want the point of the heel to be brought back. This one needs to be brought back a little further. We want a uniform hoof wall and a nice, clean-looking foot. It has a little old bruise there. When I work with the veterinary students, I have to teach them there's two different basic tools. One is used for pulling shoes, and that's a dull tool like that, and the other has knife edges used for trimming. And students are very good at using this tool to do that, and that wrecks this tool. And so I tell my students, you guys are very good at breaking things and losing things. So the first thing we have to do is take the shoe off, and we have these little clinches that have to come off. And if you know how to remove the clinches, it makes that job a little easier. And the easiest way, it kind of tracks the foot up a little bit, but is to rasp them off with the smooth side of the rasp. And then if we grab the shoe, right, with the shoe pullers at the heel and just pry it up just a little bit so we don't bother the horse, and then pop it back down, and that nail kind of comes up, and now you can grab that and pull individual nails out. An alternate method, we have a thing called a nail puller. This tool's got tiny little jaws that can pull individual nails out, and especially when a horse is lame, this is a nice way to remove a shoe without bothering the horse, and you're not trying to pull everything at once. This thing's kind of sensitive. So when we start looking at a foot that's grown out and we want to start trimming it, this is what I call trimming to the golden ratio. And this point here, if you remember earlier, I talked about where the extensor tendon and the deflexor tendon insert. So if I drilled a hole in this foot right about here, which is just behind the apex of the frog, if I drilled a hole in there in a cadaver foot, I would hit both of those insertions. And that's a landmark to me. That's something I cannot change. So this is, I draw these lines out on the ground for clients. And right here is where the foot ends, where the heel ends right there. And this needs to be brought way back here. And we've got a lot of unsupported leg right here. And here's the toe. And so when we start trimming, first thing we want to do is loosen up any of the old retained sole. Some horses have a lot of that. Other horses have very little. So again, knowing what you're looking at is very important. And so I've done a half trim, and see how I brought this heel back to support things better, getting this more in line with the widest part of the frog. And now we're ready to rasp and smooth it up. So you see the difference now. We have a shorter distance here and a much longer distance here. And why this becomes important in the full trim is this is where all the weight bearing has to occur, and this is the leverage that the horse has to overcome to move forward. And this is roughly a 1/3 to 2/3 ratio to get it right. And this works mechanically correct for the horse. And this is what's called the golden ratio. It's actually 1.61 to 1, and I have calipers that you can actually judge this. And usually this is your effective toe length too. And so there's your before and after trim, and see how much that has changed, how this horse supports the weight and how the horse functions. And a lot of the horses that I see that are coming in for stumbling and various performance problems, the golden ratio lines are reversed on that horse. And we put them into the proper parameters, the horse immediately is moving better, and some of these stumbling problems go away. So now we're getting ready for rasping. And again, if you do any of your own hoof work, 2 hands on the rasp. The push hand is labor, and the other hand on the other end is management. So that's how you have to work that rasp, not fighting each other. So labor and management to rasp the foot well. And now we're ready to shoe. And you can see we have fairly uniform hoof wall thickness. We're down to the widest part of the frog. Things are cleaned up. And we've got a shoe on there, basic horseshoe put on. And again, going back, trimming to the golden mean. So if we do it this way, here's that spot we talked about. And there are the other two spots, 1/3, 2/3. And here's where I see a lot of feet trimmed to or shoes fit. So it puts a fulcrum here that actually rocks the horse backwards. So even if the horse has a lot of heel, it's in the wrong place where that fulcrum is. And that's a problem we see. And quite often shoes are too short when the foot is trimmed. So trimming a foot is like putting a foundation in for a house. If we have the wrong foundation, we don't have the right house. The house is not going to fit on it. And so here again, here's your side view. We have about a 1/3, 2/3, and then we just have a little area here where we know what lacks. You know, we don't need a lot of support back there for your Z-axis. So when we look at the stance, here's your normal, nice hoof pastern axis. Everything is lined up. When we're broken back, you can see how the coffin bone is actually rotated backwards. It should be, just a slight positive angle here. And now we have a stress point here with a broken back hoof pastern axis. And here with too much heel, we have a stress point further up there, and the coffin bone is at too much of a positive angle. And here's another old out of a book. This stuff is timeless. With a nice, properly trimmed foot, we have the force coming down and balanced in the back part of the foot. And here we have it missing. This higher heel here, longer toe. So everything has to be in proportion to the leg. So this is when I talk about geometry and physics. Here's another horse. So here we have that 1/3, 2/3 ratio. This shoe has a roll toe. So that line there and that line there. So we do a different configuration. We can reconfigure the shoe to achieve our golden ratio. So that's what shoes are helpful for. Plus we have a little bit more shoe sticking out here for support. So we have sometimes replacing steel where the foot isn't and needs to be for support. And here's using the golden ratio calipers. This is your apex of the frog to the heels, and this is your effective toe length. So this is all in balance. If you look, if you want to look at the golden ratio for other things, if I take that same set of calipers and take the measurement from this joint to that joint and flip it around, it's in the golden ratio, and including the screen of my iPhone, if I put it on that, the lit screen of the iPhone will be 1/3, 2/3 too. So if it's good enough for Apple, it's good enough for me. But we use it all the time, and it's a great way. We draw the lines on the ground. People can see the before and after very easily. So let's talk about whether we should shoe horses or whether we shouldn't shoe horses. So why do we shoe horses? Why do we do this anyway? Hoof protection is the main reason most people think about when we're shoeing horses. But we do want to manage the hoof capsule. What I mean by managing the hoof capsule, when there's cracks in it, when the horse doesn't have optimum conformation, we need to be able to put some metal where the foot isn't. We need to support what needs to be supported because not every horse is perfect. So we can correct or enhance gaits. So correcting gaits by shoeing the horse, if the horse is a sloppier mover, we can actually help the horse move a little straighter by how we trim and configure the shoes. And enhancing the gait could be important if we're showing a horse in certain types of endeavors where we want the horse to move a certain way. We can affect the way the horse moves with the way we shoe the horse. If it's a distance horse, we want to shoe that horse so he gets the most out of its every stride. So if he's taking tens of thousands of steps, then we want every step to count and have less stress. If we're looking to shoe a show horse, a gaited horse, we want to impress a judge with a high stepping gait. So we can change what the horse does by how we trim and shoe and configure the shoes. We can manage these conformation faults, again, by putting metal where the foot isn't and needs to be. We can help horses balance themselves better. We can provide extra traction which allows the horse to work in environments that would be hazardous without the shoe. We can prevent and cure lameness, which was something we do in the veterinary hospital all the time. And proper shoeing provides a competitive edge for most equine athletes. And it's not the same as putting boots on. Boots definitely serve a purpose, but they don't do what shoes do. They provide protection, a little shock absorption, but they don't do most of these other things. It's very hard to manage gaits or provide traction or do all the things that shoes do, but boots have a place when they're used properly. And barefoot, well, there's a lot of talk about should we keep horses barefoot? And sometimes barefoot means no hoof care at all. Sometimes it means special hoof care, and there's lots of different special 4-point trims, high performance trims, Strasser trim. Everybody is trying to sell their own trimming, many of which are in conflict with one another. And there's a lot of people who want natural hoof care, which I think is an oxymoron. Because if you want natural, then you shouldn't be doing anything. You shouldn't be keeping the horse in 2 or 5 acres. So natural hoof care really is to me, is more in slick advertising. And then we have extreme anti-horseshoe people who think I'm the devil, and putting nails in horses' feet is terrible, and putting metal against the horse's body is terrible. Shouldn't have a bit in a horse's mouth, and you have to live with that. And they do deny that there is damage by a horse being shoeless. Damage is only done by shoes, and of course, damage can be done by shoes. I'm not denying that at all. And again, certainly you want to maybe help the horse a little bit if you're not going to shoe it with metal. At least use hoof boots to help the horse. And the truth about horseshoes is the proper trim is the most important part of the job. Without good, proper, sensible trimming, doesn't matter what the shoes are. If the shoe doesn't fit, the horse is better without the shoe. Horses that need shoes will underperform or suffer without them. Athletic horses need athletic shoes. I developed this WITH protocol. We gave a lecture to the faculty last week on this, and this is a whole other lecture we can give next year. But WITH is an acronym to help decide whether a horse needs shoes or not. And W stands for work. What kind of work does the horse do? I is intensity, and that means collection, speed, and power. How much power we're trying to transmit to the ground to do what the horse is doing. D is for duration, the distance that the horse goes, the training schedule or competition regimen. T is for terrain. Is the horse on groomed reins or hard ground, on pavement, or out in the fields? And H is the individual horse, the breed, the conformation, what the owner does with the horse, the husbandry involved. So we have a whole lecture on plugging different horses into the WITH protocol, and it really makes a lot of sense when you do that. Sometimes barefoot doesn't work, and the horse did this to its foot just running around in the field because it was fly intolerant, and it wasn't the right horse to be barefoot. Quick little talk about the American Farriers Association. It's one of the 2 big national organizations that certify and teach farriers to become better at what they do with the certification program. There's also another organization called the American Association of Professional Farriers. They both have great websites, lots of information. If you want to look up more about it, they're really great informational sources. So one of the things we try and teach here is know what normal is so you can recognize abnormal. And that's very important. What's normal, what's a quality good foot, and what's normal for your own horse. So when we see neglected feet like that, yeah, that's obviously not normal. And that certainly isn't normal neglect. There's no excuse for that kind of neglect. But you take a saw to it and then take the nippers to it, and actually we got this donkey going pretty good. Canker is another one that you should be able to recognize. Canker is not the same as thrush. Thrush is a necrotic process, where canker is a proliferative process. It bleeds if it's nicked. If you run a hoof pick over a horse's foot and it starts to bleed, it's probably likely that looks like that, might have canker going on and needs veterinary and farrier help. Here's another one. see the exudate that's coming out of there. Thrush usually has a blackish type exudate or just black bioslime. This stuff is really eating into the vascular tissues. Same foot after it's trimmed and soaked in chlorine dioxide. Here's thrush. So you see the difference here. Thrush is undermining the frog and just eating things away. It's not proliferative like the canker was. Lameness caused by hoof shape. So you can see how this hoof is pushed up here in this heel, and you see all this tissue is torn apart here, and this is conformationally caused. Heels are too high because they haven't been trimmed right, and this horse is quite lame with all this activity going on in here that needs the proper trimming and possibly shoeing to help it. Contracted heels is another one that's not normal. So these heels are pinching inside there on these structures here. The foot is very long and stretched out, and length to width is not correct at all. This is very all run forward. Again, not a healthy foot. Horses sometimes stick their feet in places they shouldn't go, and they do nasty things, and they look horrible, but with the right attention, yes, you have a scar there, but everything goes down, and this horse is just fine. Abscesses, we see a lot of abscesses, and they sometimes make a horse very, very lame, and as soon as we relieve the abscess, the horse is immediately sound. But a horse can be fracture lame, non-weight bearing lame, with a bad abscess, and that's what people are usually hoping when they bring horses in. But you can see where this kind of blew out the side. This is extreme, but we had to cut all that out of there to just clean it up. Some horses have mismatched feet. A lot of different variations of this. We have a round foot, and of course on the other side, a little bit longer foot, and you have two different hoof pastern axes, two different shapes. You can see bruising different, so everything is different on this horse. But this horse couldn't stand straight either. The horse was very crooked. It needed a chiropractor just as much as it needed a farrier. But small shoes equal poor feet. So shoes that are too light, fit too tight, too much heel, not enough support. Here's the back of the frog here. Don't help these feet. And so here's what's normal and healthy. And you can see this nice line right across the widest part of the frog. Nice, long, healthy looking frog. You can visualize the 1/3, 2/3 ratio there. Here's a properly fit shoe. And this is not the way to do either of these jobs. And I think the same guy did both. But you can see that this shoe is way too short, way too light, and the golden ratio is pretty much reversed here. We got a lot in front, we have no heel support. So everyday hoof care, know what's normal for your horse. That's very important. Know what normal is in general and what's normal for your horse. Pick out debris and inspect. You don't have to go crazy, you don't have to go digging holes, but know what the bottom of the horse's foot's supposed to look like. Treat any infections early. There's all kinds of good products on the market. If there's any thrush or anything going on, obviously communicate with a vet or a farrier. Do not let mud build up on the coronary band and fetlocks. And of course, it's very hard when we have the kind of mud season we have here. But once things dry up, kind of get that stuff off occasionally. You can really prevent a lot of problems by just keeping the lower leg clean, hosing it down. You can even mix up something very quickly and easily, like dilute white vinegar with water and spray to keep infections down. There's lots of easy, quick things you can do to help these horses. Check the shoes if they have them. And again, know what's normal. Know what a normal stance is. Know what a normal frog looks like. Here's a horse, chronic laminitis, and you can see we had to resect the whole front of the hoof wall to try and help deal with all this tearing. Here's what these feet look like radiographically. The coffin bone has been rotated downward. We've tried this shoe with a frog support on this horse and a lot of support there to help this horse. Sometimes we see feet collapsing around the coffin bone. Again, things got too long. There's usually a defect underneath a crack like this, that the hook is not well attached there, so part of the coffin bone is eroded away. but we put a glue-on cuff shoe on this horse to kind of hold everything together. We use a lot of the glue-on technology, and there's a lot of different versions of it. Here's another chronic hoof track that somebody tried to patch with something. It's going right up to the coronary band. And so just by doing the right trimming, cleaning it up, putting a shoe on with side clips, holding things together, then we can rebuild over this and do anything we want to that. This horse actually had a penetrating injury to the coffin bone, would not walk, and there's your piece that's been penetrated and pulled off. And with a frog support shoe, this horse walked like nothing was wrong. So just by putting some frog support, rigid frog support on this horse, it took that strain that was hanging. Remember, the horse is hanging on the inside of the hoof wall, had all that damage. It's trying to descend down into the space that's there. Put the hard bar shoe on, and boom, horse. Now all we have was a wound to deal with. We didn't have a painful horse, which helps the horse a lot. Here's the one that came in, stepped on a clip on the shoe. So here's where a case where horse shoes do damage to horses' feet when something goes wrong, and we had to pull out this chunk. But we did that, standing surgery, opened up the bottom of the foot, had one of the surgeons go in there, and this is what we pulled out. And then make up a plate shoe with a modified frog support and 4 bolts to hold that plate on. This is a big Belgian horse, and there he is. And he walked out like nothing was wrong. And they could take him home and take the plate off and medicate it, and the horse went back to work. We do a lot of corrective shoeing for foals. We glue on shoes with heel extensions or lateral extensions to help these foals. And the big thing about when we're doing this, if you raise any foals, you want to recognize angular limb deformities, rotational deformities early, and be able to recognize them early and come up with a plan, because the clock is ticking on these horses. And you have less than 3 months to really do something for lower limb, and 6 or 7 months as time goes further up the leg. So if you recognize angular limb deviation or rotational deviation, talk with the vet, bring it into us. We can come up with a plan that may avoid surgery. The whole aim is to avoid the surgery. The surgery usually consists of putting a screw in the growth plate to slow one side down to equalize the leg. But I cheat the surgeons out of a lot of surgeries if they bring them in early, and I can do some of these extension shoes. Here's one that had flexural deformities, and we had to put heel extensions on behind because he couldn't even stand up to nurse. He had other problems too. This donkey actually fractured here, and look what he did to his leg, and just with this little bit of support, he could stand up just fine. So there are a lot of things we could do on things that look terrible. And but again, recognizing it early and coming up with a plan of action. This is not really good to have in your horse's foot. That's a pretty big nail, but it missed most of the bad structures, and all we had to do is pull that out, medicate it, and shoe the horse, and he was fine. Modern day farrier, a little bit different than the old image. This happens to be one of my older trucks where we have a forge, an anvil, all kinds of supplies and equipment to do whatever is necessary. Most of you people have horses. Your guys that come out or ladies that come out have some similar type of unit. These farrier bodies are actually made in Genoa, New York, and the guy who founded this company was one of my apprentices. And he decided my way of thinking, when I thought I had pretty good, actually wasn't good enough, and he came up with a better idea. And now everybody's got one of them. But we carry all kinds of different shoes, different configurations of different sizes and shapes and types. There's something for everything: racing plates, strap horse shoes, plastic composite shoes, special shoes. People ask me about aluminum versus steel. Well, aluminum is 1/3 the weight of steel for the same configuration. Steel is more durable, aluminum is more expensive, but it's easier to manufacture special shoes out of aluminum. So when weight is a consideration, we go to aluminum. And there's therapeutic shoes. A lot of these I make. Used to have to make by hand. Now I can buy them, so it makes things a lot easier and quicker. A couple more shots of horses with navicular disease. Here's a very rough-looking coffin bone, out of shape. Remember we talked about that digital cushion? Look how weak that digital cushion is. And we use a reverse aluminum shoe on navicular disease horses. One method, depending upon the conformation. Conformation is very important, as we talked about. So this is a reverse navicular shoe. An anatomist in France developed these. His name is Jean-Marie Denois, and he's got a great website, DENOIX. Very forward-thinking person. But this is nothing new. Legend says that bank robbers used to shoe their horses backwards out west so that they could be going the other direction where they were tracked. And I'm also told that Napoleon actually shot a whole regiment of horses backwards so that they would, do a surprise attack. So the reverse shoe is, although we're using it in a different way now, this has been in history here and there. Chronic ring bone. So all these, this extensor tendon has actually been pulled off of there, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on in this radiograph. And you can see this is not a normal looking structure in here. Horse nails. Actually worked for the largest horse nail manufacturer in the world and helped redesign their US line years ago. And but horse nails come in different sizes and different types for different uses. These race nails are the smallest because they're the shortest duration. Race horses are usually shot every 3 weeks. They don't need as much nail in their foot. They have thinner walls and smaller shoes. Whereas you go to the other end of the spectrum, these very big nails are used on draft horses because you have a lot of thickness in shoe, you have a lot of foot, sometimes pads, and you use every bit of that nail. But these are the more normal nails that we use in everyday shoeing. We have all kinds of glue-on shoes, these cuff-style shoes. This is a super wedge put on this foot here because this horse had an injury that we had to lift up the back of the foot. We glue a lot of frog support shoes on chronic laminitis horses just to help them so we're not hammering into an already traumatized foot. Other glue-on shoes, this is a complete polyurethane shoe that glues on. You can see the tabs. And this is a chronic laminitis horse. I had to do a lot of toe resecting on these guys. And I can glue something on, rebuild the foot at the same time, and give the horse frog support and protection. All kinds of specialty shoes. You see a lot of shoes for the heavy shoes and pads for the gaited horses, saddlebreds, Morgans, Arabians, versus the race horses, standardbreds, thoroughbreds, and quarter horses. Different shoes, different jobs. Dressage horses and hunter jumpers want shoes that keep them on top of the surface they work on for flotation and nice, easy action, whereas polo, 3-day eventing, fox hunters need traction to keep them from slipping. So everything has a use. Every type of horse has a different type of shoe and how it's applied. Many different options. We have great winter shoeing options. These are called no snow pads. Doesn't let the snow build up. This has got a rubber tube that goes around here that flexes, got some studs. This is a draft horse shot for the road with leather pads. Many ways we can do these horses. And this is something we need to keep away from little girls, especially if you have to pay the bills. This is a horse here. Might recognize this horse, kind of famous. His name is Justify. And this is my friend Curtis Burns, who actually shot Justify, and call this. This is not Justify's foot, but this horse has a similar injury that Justify had that you didn't know about. And Curtis called me up. We talked about different ways to do it, and we talked for maybe 2 or 3 minutes on how to shoe the horse and 20 minutes for his level of stress. And I spoke to him the night Justify won. We spoke afterwards, and I complimented him because he kept that horse through 2 races. And that's the Justify patch that he put on Justify. We had to have a drain in there just like that, and this is the method he used with this type of hook repair, so this could be flushed out. And so Justify ran with this patch. We do sometimes have to shoe these guys. this horse had a bad infection, and we blew a block on the other side. There's not a horse, it's a big Chianina, 2,600 pounder. So we do actually have to shoe these guys every now and then. And that's the end of it. Time to go. Thank you. If you have any questions, individual problems with your horses, I'm here at your disposal. Yes.
I had a horse that had navicular disease for a handful of years. Ultimately, we had to put him down because we couldn't manage his pain anymore. What are some common causes of navicular?
Well, it's a combination of things. So some of it's hereditary. Of course, it's predisposed conformationally for this problem, as other problems. Certainly, the conformation is involved. The lack of proper trimming and shoeing before you got the horse in some cases. I bought a horse from a client years ago that I've been shoeing for a little while. I didn't see anything wrong with this horse. The horse was too much horse for this client. And I actually rode the horse there, helping her train the horse. And I said, well, I like the way this horse feels and everything. And she said to me, gee, this horse goes really well for you. You ought to buy the horse. It's too much horse for me. And I did. And I trained the horse for polo really quick. And I really liked the horse. He was a real trainable, fun horse to have. And a couple of years down the road, he started going lame, and I had him radiographed. I didn't bother to do a pre-purchase because I knew the horse and the price was right. And his navicular bones looked terrible for his age. It was just awful. And when, after a while, when I saw this client again, I mentioned this to her, not trying to say you sold me a bad horse. She said, I heard before I was bought him, he was barrel raced a lot when he was 3. So that would actually make a lot of sense that he was overused at a developing age. So that would be one of the causes. But most of the time, again, that's a real high stress area on a horse's foot. And so if things are not right for a horse that's predisposed, the wear and tear, sometimes not very much, can cause the problems. So this is something that there's a certain heredity factor, a certain conformation factor, a use factor. All these combine to either take a horse down or not. And it's unfortunate, the N word, as we like to say, is not something people want to hear. Yet I have x-rays with horses that were born with a navicular bone that's not even joined together. And the horse is actually relatively sound. So you just wonder what bothers horses and what doesn't. But certainly there's no one answer for your question, where does it come from? But it's mostly the horse's predisposition, and a lot of it has to do with conformation and development and use during that time. Anything else? Come on.
What's your thought on hoof supplements?
Depending upon, again, we like to know what the horse is lacking before we start just giving him stuff. Does the horse have a hoof problem? I have a mare at home that I've had most of her life, who's never grown a good foot, and I've tried every supplement on the market with her, and I have not found anything that has made any difference in her. I've seen other hoof supplements that actually do good results. So sometimes I believe the horse's ability to absorb what we're giving him, the bioavailability of the product, and the horse maybe has an absorption problem in its digestion that's inherent to the horse. So that may be one reason why the horse is not growing the quality foot that you'd like. But certainly, I wouldn't just be feeding anything. I would want to know why. I'd want to see what's going on with the horse's foot, and I would want to look at the ingredients on hoof supplements. And anything that's like, the feed companies have different ways of approaching this. Some will put in, like, for instance, zinc is very important for hoof growth. You know that. So they may have something and might say zinc sulfate, so many milligrams or whatever they're putting in the feed. Well, that's not very bioabsorbable, but zinc methionine is, because it's bonded to an amino acid. So we want to really look at not just what's in there, but how it's being delivered. and does my horse need it? But the hoof supplement market is huge at this point, and I'm not sure how many of them are that effective. Yes?
You talked a little bit about environment, and this year's been so incredibly mucky. So we have had a little bit of a debate about you turn the horses out or you leave them in to like let them dry out. Should they have a period of time in?
I think if they're showing negative results, they're having a lot of abscesses, thrush problems, lower limb in their hair coat problems, then maybe cleaning them off, hosing them down, putting some kind of disinfectant on and letting them dry off for a little bit. But again, that's more labor to keep them in. Some of the horses don't like being in, so it's not an easy question to answer. I have the same problem in my place.
Preventative before an issue start, you know, it's like you're just waiting for abscess.
Right,
To start
right.
all that month.
Yeah,
Others say it's a healthy horse will be a healthy horse.
yes, and some horses are more resistant to their environment and do well no matter what. And other horses really are affected a lot individually by their environment. I've shot horses for people around here for a long time. Now we go to some places and they take the horses out and they have a run-in shed that's only going to get cleaned out once things dry up. And these horses are basically standing in packed down manure all winter. And the feet are beautiful. And there are some horses that live in beautiful, clean clock stalls and they have thrush and hoof problems. So there's a lot more to it than the environment. You know, an immune system is involved. Again, the horse's individual makeup, conformation has a lot to do with it. Horses that load and land and healthily have better blood supply and healthier feet. Horses that have a poor constitution, let's say, are going to have more hoof problems. And I wish there was an easy answer. And what I've told some people is if you can if you can manage the environment, for instance, simple things maybe cost a little money, but if you have horses in a lot and you don't have gutters on the roof of your barn, so now the roof of your barn is a big water collector and it runs down into your paddock, and now the horses are in soup. Well, maybe you get that water running elsewhere, that'll take care of some of that problem, just like management things that can be done in some places and maybe can't in others. You know, you go to places out in the countryside here, they string a barbed wire fence around a swamp and call that a horse pasture. That's not the best place. You lose a lot of shoes in there. You have a lot of foot problems. So sometimes that's just the way it is. And you can say something, but they're not going to change it. I've been called out and done hoof resections and hard bar shoes on horses that were foundered pretty bad. And I'm looking at where they're going to turn the horse out when I'm done. And I'm going, you're going to turn the horse out, and that I've just opened up the front of his foot, put an expensive shoe on, and all you have is a mud hole to turn him out. Doesn't make sense. Maybe buy some fence posts and put them in a drier area for a while. But sometimes the management has a big effect if you can change the management situation. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But you know, this type of weather has not been good. You know that, I know that, everybody knows that. Yes.
I just had to switch farriers, and the new farrier uses nails that are copper coated.
Yes,
for
yes.
antimicrobial. Is there evidence that that works?
Actually works, or copper has a certain amount of antibacterial effects. It's become kind of a part of its marketing, and part of its, it actually can be helpful. One of the reasons why farriers like the copper nails is because they're different, they're new and shiny, they don't get tarnished. So in wet environments, they hold up better. We have other coatings on nails that we work with. I've experimented with several of them to keep the nails from deteriorating the horse's foot. And in the wet environments, there's probably a certain amount of good that comes from this. And so it's certainly not going to hurt your horse. And the copper nails are becoming, or copper-coated nails is what they are becoming more and more popular. They actually cost more, but if they help feet from deteriorating, then that's a good thing. And so some farriers are starting to use them more and more. Part of it's marketing, but part of it, there's a certain amount of efficacy with it. Yes?
When should you start shoeing younger horses?
Well, that varies from use and breed to breed. Typically, unless the horse has foot problems, dealing with conformational issues, wearing his feet funny, they shouldn't need shoes until they're actually starting the training. And then it's very individual to the horse of what you're trying to do and what your training schedule is. Your warm bloods mature a little bit later, but they're bigger and heavier, so maybe their training starts very low intensity. Thoroughbreds on the track are being shot as yearlings to 2-year-olds because they're going to be put to work, and they need that type of support. When we talk about, like, we like to keep shoes off horses as long as possible for good foot development and so on and so forth, but we also want to protect them if they're in a harsh environment or if they have bad wear patterns or we're trying to deal with conformational issues. And one of the things I've noticed with my clients over the years, especially with some of the bigger, heavier horses like the warm bloods, we have front shoes on them because they need more support. They're bigger horses. They're going to get put to work. We don't want them foot sore when we're training them because then maybe they're going to associate a certain amount of discomfort with training, and we don't want that to happen. So we're putting front shoes on because that's where you start. And they're training these horses and they're moving along and things are going good. And then at some point, they're muscled up and they're asking this horse to collect and use its hind end, and it's just not happening. You put the correct type of shoe on behind, which is usually something a little more supportive, maybe something that fits a little full on the outside and a little extension. And the next day, the horse is collecting and using its hind end. So we're giving this horse the tools to do the job by shoeing the horse in that case. So again, very variable, but as they get into work, and definitely if the horse is starting to work and is maybe not cooperating, maybe he's sour about it, maybe he's not forward as much, then you want to think about getting shoes on the horse to help the horse so he's not associating discomfort and pain with the work that you're trying to do. Yes?
Do you know any good secret thrush treatments?
None of them are secret. I mean, there are all good ones out there like Thrush Buster, and that's one I use a lot. They're easily made. What I like about the Thrush Buster and others that are like it, they stain the active ingredient into the tissue. So if you use, and Thrush Buster is an antiseptic. So it's whereas some people use mastitis treatment, but that's an antibiotic, and the microbes develop a certain amount of resistance to that. So an antiseptic that stains to the tissue has longer effects. So something that stays there longer and stains into the tissue with the active ingredient is going to be most helpful. But just keeping things clean and dry is also, again, hard to do in this environment. Yes?
Do you find specific breeds have worse feet than others? Like, do thoroughbreds really have more sensitive feet than?
Well, thoroughbreds are, think of what the horse is. They're lighter bone, so they have less hoof wall in most cases, especially in younger horses, thinner soles. As we were talking about earlier, the foot of the horse is very particular to the breed. Now, it doesn't mean all thoroughbreds have lousy feet. Some of them, they haven't bred that out of some of them. Some of them have very good feet. But comparatively speaking, the thoroughbreds are a two-edged sword. They refine horses like quarter horses and warm bloods. Yet at the same time, some of those refinements make the horse too delicate. So it becomes very individual. There was a great talk that I listened to by Dr. Anzac about the genome of the horse. And he did some work. It was great. Seminars a couple weeks ago it was. And he talked about how diverse the older feral horses are compared to our modern breeds. So we've actually narrowed the gene pool on our modern breeds, and we've actually weakened them a lot by doing that. And so when we're producing, we want a horse that can run fast to produce winnings. That's what the racing industry is about. So interestingly enough, other than a horse like Justify and Secretariat, most of the thoroughbreds, the speeds have not increased. It just goes, the median is flat. Whereas they've done the genomic testing on the dairy cattle, and milk production and longevity keeps going up, and up. Because they're breeding for those things instead of money earnings. Money earnings means a horse can run fast, doesn't mean he can have a long career necessarily. And if there's 10 horses in the race, somebody's got to be a money earner. It doesn't matter how fast they run, if that's faster than the other horses. So what the thoroughbred business has done has not been all that helpful. And we've introduced the thoroughbreds into the quarter horse world, which at the beginning was really good with the running style quarter horse. And I had some of the best polo horses I ever had out of that. And now you can't find anything like that. And they've destroyed that breed. Especially either you have these big, tall 17-hand horses with feet this big and walls as thin as a thoroughbred who can't stay sound. I see some of them on a regular basis. And so you have to have some sense about what you're doing when you start messing with this stuff. But yeah, it's a conundrum, really.
I have a thoroughbred that she's been barefoot for the past 6 years or so, but you always hear a lot of people, well, she's gonna be sore because she's a thoroughbred. And
Not necessarily.
I mean, she's going into work now, and 5 days a week, she's needing shoes. But
the ground is hard and frozen now.
Exactly.
And if the ground stayed soft and your ring is a nice ring to work in, and the horse would probably be okay without shoes, but you put her on with sole depth is everything with these horses. So
I guess that's what I meant.
with little sole depth, then you don't have a lot protecting the coffin bone, and there's all this sensitive tissue and structures between the ground and the coffin bone that are getting beat up. And so we have inflammation that can occur. And there's an old term called road founder, where when they would drive horses down the road and get the feet inflamed, they would have a mild inflammation, like a mild laminitis, and it was known as road founder because all these little blood vessels are becoming inflamed because of this. Just like if you were smacking her all the time, you get micro bruising and so on. So getting the foot off the ground with the protection of the shoe, but we want a good healthy frog on the ground. We don't want that off the ground. So how we trim the foot, keep the frog healthy, put something to get that foot off the ground somehow and protect the bottom of the foot that way. And again, there are people who, just like people can run the New York City Marathon barefoot. Not everybody can. And now that people have been running with the gloves on instead of running shoes, now there's a lot of data now that's saying these people are hurting their feet over time too. And the studies that have been done on the feral horses, and there's been 2 good studies now. If you look up Brian Hampson, Hampson, the original study was done in Australia on 5 different herds of feral horses and 5 different climates, and found a different hoof model in each climate. And so that adapted, the ones that lived adapted to that climate. And they produced ones that can keep adapting to that climate. And then when they moved them to other climates and geographies, they didn't do well. Their feet were sore, they didn't graze, they had to be rescued. And the second study was looking at the different morphology of the hooves on these horses and finding a tremendous amount of pathology on these feral horses. That all this stuff that horses in nature is supposed to not have any problems. Actually, they found lots of pathology on these horses. And but they only have to be sound enough to survive. They don't have to run fast, they don't have to jump fences, they don't have to collect themselves, they don't have to run around barrels or whatever. They only have to survive. So the pathology, if they can survive with what pathology they have, that's fine. But it's interesting to talk about it. Yes.
Do you have to change the way you trim horses, but if you are putting on weighted shoes?
Usually we're leaving a little more hoof for those horses. We want more toe length. We're looking for action, so to speak. So we're creating leverage at the toe. We're leaving more hoof, and we're balancing that leverage with extension behind the foot so everything still stays under the leg. So the shoes, actually, the size of the shoe has to grow over a normal shoe that because you have to support the leg at the same time. So what you add there, you have to add on one end, you have to put on the other end to do everything right. So you're not going to turn that horse out in the muddy pasture. Because those shoes won't survive that.
Seems like our questions are quieting down. I don't want to disturb anybody, but I just want to thank everybody for coming. I did also want to let you know that we have some of our clinicians here. So Dr. Mary Smith, thanks for coming tonight as well, and Dr. Sabine Mann. We have one of our technicians from the Large Animal Hospital, Eileen, here as well. Thanks. Sorry, I know you'd be embarrassed by me pointing you out. But thanks for coming tonight. If you have any questions for us, let us know. I also, well, Lindsay, here you are. It's from the animal science group here in the Cornell Cooperative Extension. So we thank them for helping us put together, and same with Sarah Bassman, so for making our posters and organizing all of us. We would like input from you. We see that not everybody signed up today, so please, if you can sign up as you're leaving. If you have ideas for us or want us, a particular topic that you'd like us to cover, please let us know. And then there are apples there as well, so please take apples for yourself and your horses. We know it's Christmas time and you're going to be cookies later. So, but feel free to ask some more questions or approach any of us about things as well. But we really are glad that you came here tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve, so much for a great talk.
That's an old access.